start up? It's 17?
Yes, I think go ahead, please.
Okay. Okay, welcome everyone, and thanks for coming to this roundtable on rethinking demographic training for the 21st century. I will try to do a tiny bit in Spanish, or at least pronounce words in Spanish and a little bit Portuguese correctly. Bienvenidos a esta mesa ronda sobre repensar la formación demográfica para el siglo XXI. We have, I think, a stellar set of panelists, and this topic is, in my view, long overdue for discussion. I'm the moderator of the session. My name is Tom Legrand. I'm the president of the International Union for the Scientific Study of Population and a professor at the University of Montreal. And I want to thank Georgina Binstock and Susanna Cavanaggi, who have been very important in helping with organize this session. The way this session will be, excuse me, organized, I will start it off with a very brief overview of the big issues around the need to reform demographic training. Then each of the panelists will speak, and I will ask each of them one or two follow-up questions to draw out certain aspects of their presentation. Afterwards, I'll give the panelists a couple minutes to ask questions of other panelists if things came to mind, and then we'll open up the discussion to the audience, other participants. I think the panelists are a superb group in terms of their backgrounds and their experiences. The first panelist will be Sonal Dassé, who will be speaking on training demographers for a world in transition. Sonal is a professor of sociology at the University of Maryland, director of NCAER, the National Data Innovation Center in India, and she is also the incoming PAA president. The next person to present will be Silvia, I cannot pronounce her last name, Hirohuli Salcedo, who is director of the Colegio de Mexico, professor of demography there. And she will be speaking on training in demography in uncertain times, challenges in a context of changing policies regarding higher education in Latin America. The third presenter will be Jordana Cristina de Jesus, who will speak on university training in demography. What are the challenges in Brazil? Jordana is an adjunct professor of demography and actuarial sciences at the Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte in Brazil. The last presentation will be given by Franz Willikens on challenges for advanced demographic research training, lessons from the European Doctoral School of Demography. Frans is the former director of the Netherlands Interdisciplinary Demographic Institute, NIDI, emeritus professor of population studies at the University of Groningen, and he was formerly senior researcher and chief research coordinator at the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research. He played a very important role in the development of the European Doctoral School. Excuse me, I've got problems with my throat. Without wasting any more time, I'll start my quick introduction so that we can keep as much time as possible for the discussion. As I mentioned, this session aims to reflect on the challenges faced by high-level research doctoral training programs today, and to exchange on ways to better adapt them to the current context. We are not looking at reforms to master's professional demographic training programs, which is another topic that is also worthy of discussion. The field of demography or population studies has evolved greatly, and its range of study has grown very much over the past decades. I remember in the 1970s, the arrival of computers, large data sets with individualized data, the use of econometric methods caused a major expansion in the scope and type of demographic analyses. And that gave rise at times even then that traditional demographic methods, informal demography, risked being marginalized. In recent years, there's been an emergence of big data, social media data, remote sensing data, and many other types, new data collection approaches using mobile phones, internet surveys, and the such, issues linked to interoperability, linking all of these types of data sets together, partly in order to evaluate them, the development of new methods, for example, Bayesian methods for small area estimation and population projections, and new thematic areas. And these have far surpassed the capacity of any one university training program to provide comprehensive training. A commonly voiced concern over the years has been how to ensure that core demographic theories and methods are conveyed to doctoral students, and how does one define this? At the same time, while ensuring that those students gain critical thinking skills and that they are accommodated in their increasingly diverse thematic and methodological interests. In addition, many population studies or demography training programs are small and are vulnerable to forced mergers or being outright closed, especially during times of tight budgets. Unlike sociology, public health, or economics departments, population training programs are at times viewed by university administrations as being expendable, especially in times of tight budgets. And thus they must regularly reaffirm their value to universities, including through having a robust student recruitment. There is a need to clearly articulate to university administrations and also to students in the job market how training in demographers differs from other social science disciplines for the study of population phenomena. What precisely do we bring to the table that is of a real added value to understanding population issues? The considerations I've just mentioned encompass substantive questions. What is core demography? What should programs teach? Financial issues. How do you appeal to prospective students and university administrations to ensure their survival of dynamic training programs capable of producing high-level population scientists? And institutional context, which are grounded in different social, economic, and political realities. These issues are all intertwined. For example, some programs now are seeking to invest in new methodologies, the question what to teach, in order to increase their appeal both to prospective students and to reaffirm their value to universities. There's also a great diversity in the types of demographic training programs. These include standalone demography departments like where I teach, programs grounded in nearby discipline like sociology or public health, population studies programs that are common in the United States that are often shared by two departments. University of Michigan had sociology and economics. And what I would call hub and spoke training programs, very strong core demographic training, but that is associated with other departments. Berkeley and Pennsylvania State in the United States are like this. And I think the European Doctoral School in Demography is an innovative variant in this approach. We'll find out about that from France in a few minutes. This diversity is not itself a problem, as the mass of different programs provides a broader range of specializations available to students with different interests. And yet none of these programs alone is capable of offering by itself the full range of advanced thematic and methodological courses to accommodate all students. As a result, training programs at times are starting to consider developing coalitions across departments or universities, allowing them to draw on the strengths of various partner programs so as to be able to offer a wider range of optional advanced classes and afterwards appropriate thesis direction to the students. Each of these different types of programs has different strengths and weaknesses, and some may prove to be models to other programs seeking to restructure themselves. However, they all face common challenges. The need to maintain high levels of training that includes essential demographic core, to incorporate new methods and thematic issues as they arise, to appeal to enough high quality students to justify their existence in tight budgetary contexts, and to continuously reaffirm their value, the value of advanced demographic training to university administrators and at times external funders and beyond, job markets and civil society. Okay, the four presentations today will touch on different aspects of these issues. And we'll start with the presentations. I want to start with Sonal Desai, who has the most broad presentation. Again, she will be talking on training demographers for a world in transition. Take it away, Sonal. You are still muted.
Yes, I have unmuted myself. Tom, just let me know if you cannot see my PowerPoint. Okay.
We do not see it yet.
Yes, I will try to share it. Okay. Are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. I think that the world around us is changing, and we as demographers are faced with a variety of challenges. But I think three are particularly challenging for us to remember. First thing is that, sometimes disciplines are so successful that they sort of talk themselves out of business. And in a way, demographers have done it by the fact that fertility has been declining. We had sort of placed our reason for existence around the population growth and population bomb, with successful demographic transition in many developing countries. There has been a shift of attention and funding away from population concerns, and it kind of comes down to us as demographic trainers. Okay? So that's our first challenge. The second one is that the methodological toolkits that other disciplines use around us have changed substantially. For example, the kind of sort of observational studies that we have historically done with large samples, large surveys, trying to infer causality, okay, are under challenge particularly from economists, as I see it, because that's the arena in which I work, but also from a variety of other fields, where the idea of sort of standard regression analysis being able to tell you a tale of causal change is no longer acceptable. Okay? Randomized control trials have become very popular, but regardless of whether you go for randomized control trials or some other analysis, I think we need to have a more sophisticated understanding and development of causal relationships, which has historically not been a forte of demographers. The third issue that I think affects many of us is that there are growing difficulties in international collaborations. Okay? Some of our training kind of came through international collaborations by faculty from other people who get trained in United States, Europe, somewhere else, coming back to teaching their home countries. Some of it happened because researchers were passing through while doing research and delivering lectures. This has become very difficult increasingly. Pandemic has just served to highlight it, but this is a longer standing issue, which also sort of plays into funding and the training programs. All three are relevant. But look, you're demographers like me. You're not going to believe me when I tell you that, oh, the demographic world is changing. So you probably would like to know some data to prove that the demographic world is changing. And I'd like to direct you to this wonderful website that Emily Merchant has set up, on which she has data on what's happening to the field as a whole. And what I did was I requested her, and she was very kind to share some of her raw data files, which I reformatted to show you the trends in the publications in the three major journals, Population Studies, Demography, and Population and Development Review, by the thematic areas. Her definition of thematic areas is it's a fairly complex latent class analysis kind of an analysis, and you would need to look at her website to get a better sense of how the definitions have taken place. But what you really want to look at is the following. First, the big chunk of work that used to be in 1960s and 70s, which was around surveys, quantitative analysis, etc., has declined substantially. What has also changed is a sort of attention to demographic transition theories. Demographic theories has also declined over time. Okay. What has grown is attention to mortality and biodemography. There has been a growth in research on social inequality, and of most concern to people in this session, attention to economic development in global south has declined over time. Even journals which were historically vastly focused on issues related to economic development, like Population and Development Review, tend to have fewer articles on economic development. And while Global South research continues, the numbers have dropped largely because some of the other journals have started focusing more extensively on Europe and other developed countries. So we are dealing with a field in which there is a sort of substantive transition that's taking place. So the question is, of course, how do we reshape our demographic training to address some of these issues? And I'd like to make 4 points. First, I think we might want to expand the boundaries of demographic training to cover broader population studies and neighboring disciplines. We may want to expand our substantive and methodological toolkit. I think we may want to think in terms of globalizing training and reversing some of the flows, south to north flows, trying to see if we can have some of the north to south flows, okay, or at least south-south collaboration. And fourth, I think we might want to diversify our partnerships in terms of what's happening within our own countries, and to diversify the placement of students and preparing students for training, to work with some of the civil society institutions instead of the historic focus that we had on universities and on national statistical offices. And let me sort of expand on each of these. In terms of the boundaries of demography, Paloni had this wonderful article in 2002 in which he was looking at demographic training, and he called demography as a dependent discipline, too small to stand up alone in academic universe, but too large to get absorbed in other disciplines, which is one of the reasons some universities have specialized demographic training centers. Some universities have it as an adjunct to other departments, as Tom mentioned. Regardless of how demography is placed within our own universities, I think we must train demographers to get a minor or a major training in a relevant academic discipline, such as public health, sociology, statistics, something else, so that the demographic toolkit finds a larger market. Our specialty is a particular brand of analytical methods, and those methods are applicable in a variety of fields. And without specialized disciplinary training, we simply don't, we are simply not able to make the kind of impact that we would like to make. I think it's a particularly important for demographers in Global South, where policy focus tends to be much greater than in the Global North. I mentioned understanding of causality. Okay, the causality and understanding analysis really requires greater substantive and disciplinary training before we can even figure out, what are the kind of factors that may affect some of the outcomes that we might be interested in. Second pitch I would like to make is that we need to expand our methodological focus. Increasingly, there is a greater attention to big data, okay? But I think it's not just big data. I think there is the personal data and there is impersonal data. There is small data and there is big data. I think demography began its existence with analyzing census data. We moved to some of the large surveys, quantitative surveys like demographic and health surveys. But we may need to start thinking about other forms of data, particularly because some of the data we would like to use have become more difficult to obtain. So for example, there is a shift to impersonal but micro data, such as the Facebook surveys or phone movement data. I'm not a huge believer in every type of big data that's out there. In particular, when I think about some of the web-based surveys and Facebook, I think there is a lot of selectivity in who responds to these sort of surveys. But we do need to think about what are the other types of data sets that we can use. And particularly, I think administrative data have a lot of potential. And this is something that we need to think about in terms of administrative record linkages and use of those data for our analytical toolkits, particularly when we are interested in comparing across countries, regions, locations, and so on. Third pitch I would like to make is that we have a tremendous bottleneck to training Southern students in Northern institutions. This is something that began with the Population Council report of 2002, when Mellon Foundation was sort of considering getting out of training programs, and they sort of sponsored this task force, which was headed by Jane Wenken, Cynthia Lloyd, Anne Blank, etc. And they provided a justification that the Southern institutions were sort of growing and were able to make up for some of the shortfalls that might come out of the declining training for Southern students in US institutions and perhaps even European institutions. That was the hope, okay? And the hope was also that some of this money that was being given to, University of Pennsylvania and University of Chicago and Maryland would transfer to some of the Southern institutions. I don't think it has happened, okay? I would hope that some of the other speakers in this group will sort of speak to that particular topic, okay? So what has happened is that it's increasingly very difficult for students from Southern countries to get admitted to graduate programs in the US and possibly in Europe, and maybe France will speak to it. At the same time, collaborative research of the Northern scholars with Southern scholars has also been facing a lot of difficulties. My own work lies in India, and I know that Indian government makes it pretty difficult to do that. I believe Brazil is equally difficult. So that's another challenge. So what happens is that you don't have collaborations, and you don't have, or collaborations are far more difficult. It seems to me that one of the ways of addressing it would be to set up joint training programs where some of the online training can take place, some of the short-term training programs can take place, and we can actually train students from other countries into doing research in Southern nations and vice versa, perhaps. Okay, so that's another thing that we may want to think about. The final pitch that I would like to make, okay, is that I think that one of the great opportunities that we have in Southern nations, okay, is that, you don't really see in US, at least, there has been a tendency to look down upon action research. That's sort of the second-class citizen, okay? Either we are academic researchers, or perhaps we get placed into government statistical offices. But I frankly find, for me at least, some of the most exciting work that's coming out of India is in action research. Some of the similar work actually happened at some point in the US. For example, some of the most exciting work on gender and population came in the US from women activists. In some of the countries like India and elsewhere, women activists have sort of asked for and carried out research on better accounting for women's work, which then gets absorbed into national statistical offices. So for us as trainers, I would like to make a pitch that we expand our sort of a horizon of where our students should work, what kind of training we provide. It does not mean diluting our academic training. Okay, I think academic training needs to stay rigorous and high quality, but working with civil society organizations could be one of the most exciting things we do. I know that with the COVID, some of the best data in India that's coming is actually coming from activist organizations who are closer to the ground than most of us in major research institutions are. Okay, I am going to stop here before Tom tries to stop me and turn it over to him. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sonal. I really liked your reflection. Oops. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I very much liked your reflection, and I think that it is in some ways a little provocative, and I hope it gives rise to a good discussion. I would have one question for you. I ask everybody, you and everyone else, to try and be relatively brief. We're behind time, probably more due to me than to anyone else. And my question for you is, quite a bit of what you were discussing was the difference between Northern institutions and Southern institutions and training. And do you think that demographic training per se should differ in significant ways between students in these being trained in these two places over and beyond. And clearly, if you're going to have a demographic training in Africa, you're going to have a lot on demographic dividend. If you have it in Germany, you're going to have a lot on aging. But beyond minor differences in emphasis, should there be substantive differences in what the training institutions actually train students?
I do. I think that I think it would, if in southern institutions, it would have to be northern plus, not a second-rate training, not anything less, but something additional. You know, one of the greatest opportunities that southern demographers have is actually to contribute to public policy. You know, I teach at University of Maryland. I'm right next door to the US Congress. Nobody's ever going to call me to, make a presentation there. But I suspect many of the people on this podium have worked extensively with their own country governments. Okay, given those options being available, I think we need to have better training for the Southern students in public policy analysis if they are going to make a sort of an impact. And this is a unique opportunity. So I think that I'd like to think of it as US or Europe plus and not minus, but certainly better training in policy analysis and policy engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you're right. We have a IUSSP initiative going on right now. And one of the things is to train young researchers in Africa how to do policy outreach. And it seems to be evident to everybody, but it is not evident. You need real training in this. And this is not part of most demographic curriculum. Okay, the next person who will be presenting is Sylvia Kiohuli. I've destroyed your name a second time, who will be presenting on training and demography in uncertain times, the challenges in the context of changing policies regarding higher education in Latin America.
Thank you, Tom. Well, I would like to start thanking Tom Legrand and IUSSP for putting this session together. Since the first time I attended ALAP, there has always been a space to discuss around the training in demography in the region. I think ALAP is a great space for this discussion and for having these comparable experiences across the world. And before I start, I want to say that I think that at this moment, it's very exciting and a very exciting time to study demography. And I think that we need to work to strengthen the programs in Latin America. And because I'm going to be a little bit pessimistic, that's why I wanted to start with this optimistic message. In advance, I agree around the challenges posed to the training in demography that Tom has already presented and Sonalde. I would say challenges and opportunities regarding curricular design, keeping up with the rapid change in science, incorporating new data and developing new methodologies to analyze new data, forming students and fostering their demographic creativity, and forming new generations that can respond to the needs of academic, public, and social sectors regarding expertise in population issues. For this discussion, I decided to talk a little bit more about the institutional setting, looking at the programs within the broader context of higher education in Latin America. I have to say that I'm a little bit biased by Mexico, which I know better, but also as president of El Colegio de México, I have been able to attend several meetings with presidents of different institutions around the world, especially with Asia, that are doing incredible things in education, and I think there are lessons to be learned there for us. So coming back to Latin America, number one, there's a large and rapid expansion in higher education since early 2000s. Interestingly, this growth is largely explained by an increase in the share of private education at the tertiary level. And we can trace a growing number of programs in demography and population studies, all of them at the graduate level. Tom mentioned that for this session, he wanted to focus on doctoral programs, but in Latin America, you have, I counted it from the ALAP website, 17 master programs and 7 PhD programs. And you have PhD programs only in Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and Uruguay, as far as I have information. Almost exclusively, these graduate programs occurred at public universities. The only exception is the Master in Demography and Population at the Universidad Peruana Cayetano Heredia, which means that forming or training demographers is an issue of public education. Second, so regarding public education, there's what's happening in the expenditure in tertiary education. If you look what has been happening between the 2000s up to date, there has been stagnant or small changes in expenditure in tertiary education. There are large differences in terms of how it's distributed. For example, in Mexico, it's mainly public. In Chile, it's mostly private. But what we can trace is that there has been a decline in the spending per student since the early 2000s that mainly affects public education. In addition, there's a very low and stagnant investment in research and innovation. In brief, regarding public education, there's a very uncertain scenario. There has been some questioning on the investment in programs in social sciences and some discussion of investing more on what is considered to be the useful sciences, no, such as like what we call the hard sciences here. And in Mexico, in the last 4 years, we have seen a change in the availability of funding for students. And this is very important because in Mexico, all the programs, the master's and PhD programs in population studies have fundings from the National Council. They fully fund their students so that they can dedicate exclusively to studying the master or PhD program. And in the last 4 years, we have seen a reduction in the number of scholarships from the National Council and restrictions in the number of students that can be accepted. So that sort of questions the model that we have been using and whether we need to move to different options so that we can expand the offer. There's also a deterioration of the learning environment due to the reduction in investment in higher education. And in the issue of international mobility is very interesting because it's different when you talk about master's programs and PhD programs. In Latin America, we need to think about international mobility of master students because that's where we have most of the trainees in demography and population studies. We have seen in Mexico also a reduction in the resources available for international mobility. And well, the pandemic also set us a very uncertain scenario for the next year. Third, regarding the relationship between training and research in demography. So most of our graduate programs, because they are at graduate programs, there's this model of teaching close to research. So here in terms of research in the region, less than 1% of the GDP is invested in research, is 0.75 in average for the region. It has also been stagnant for a decade. There's an increased limitation in resources in social sciences and humanities, and again, this trend to move towards what is considered to be more useful or productivity-related fields. And of course, it affects training. It affects the way we can incorporate students to research projects, the seminars, workshops, and other modalities that mean circulation of knowledge. And it limits the possibility of incorporating innovation in research that may have an impact in the curricula. Third, what about the labor opportunities for population experts? So on one side, you have the SDGs and the Consenso de Montevideo, which plays at the core the need of data, socio-demographic data, disaggregating, generating new data, analyzing new data. And the Consenso de Montevideo specifically mentions the importance of strengthening training in demography to respond to the needs of diagnosis and evaluation of progress in SDGs and in the Consenso. It also raises the importance of national statistic offices and local offices and the need of human resources in population studies. So hypothetically, we have a large demand settled down within the international arena for trainees in demography. On the other side, when you look at the future of labor, well, the demand is changing rapidly. There is the need, and this is something that I learned from Asian universities. There's a need of continuous education to incorporate all these new methods, new data, new questions. And especially focused focused for those outside the academic field, because within the academic field it's easier to find ways to keep updated, or at least to know what is happening. But for those outside the academic field, there are less options, and that's something that we need to think about. The other part is how are our students faring in the labor market? To what extent there's a coincidence between the hypothetical demand and the real labor opportunities for population experts? I think we know little. And the last question is, to what extent are we providing our students with the tools to adapt to a rapidly changing labor market? And the final idea has to do with the relevance of population studies and population experts for policymaking in Latin America. As I mentioned, SDGs and the consensus of Montevideo call for population experts. However, on the other side, there's a certain adverse context. First, it's not only on population studies, but in general. This disdain of scientific knowledge by some political leaders in the region. Second, this environment of polarized debates, fake news, which make our work harder. Third, there's a little interest in research, which is reflected also in expenditure. So how do we prepare our students to face this context when they come out? I think that we need to prepare the new generations with the abilities to cope and communicate with public and the social sectors. Probably we need to think about incorporating communication skills so that they are able to translate complex data into clear and simple messages based on facts and on the dynamics of public policies and public administration in Latin America. I have some closing remarks. So I don't think everything is everything about news or challenges. John Casternine yesterday in the plenary session mentioned that there's opportunity for demography in the post-pandemic, especially for formal demography and for demographic techniques. And when we reflect about training in demography, we need to think of how we are preparing our students to respond to these emerging challenges, to adapt to the rapid changes in the labor market, and to communicate outside our discipline. I agree with something that Fernalde mentioned in terms of the expansion of topics that use demographic data and techniques, that having more demographers in other fields, for example, education and educational trajectories. In Mexico, interestingly, we have seen a demand for demographies in issues on insecurity and violence, not domestic violence, but social violence. Also a demand for demographers in the evaluation of public policies, in mental health, and of course, we need to work more to incorporate more demographers on the discussion about environment and climate change. Finally, I would like this I added while I was listening to Sonalde Desai, and it also has to do with how we place the discipline within this context of open science. So in Latin America, we still publish a lot of books, edited volumes, and not only journals. And in the last 2 years, something I found at El Colegio de Mexico, we have with JSTOR a large project to digitalize all our books. And the amount of consultations of the books, it's incredible, right? It's almost all, it's like 160 books. All of them have been downloaded at least once in the span of 9 months, all around the world. So we need to move also in a more assertive way to incorporate demography into these terms in open science that is happening all around the world. Thank you, Tom. That's it.
Sorry, getting ready. Thank you very much. I thought that was very interesting presentation. I'm always interested to hear about how things are happening in Latin America, how they're similar and different to elsewhere. You had mentioned the importance of data and that the data is being denigrated by some politicians. And one of, I think, that has really brought to point the importance of hard data and good evidence is the COVID pandemic. All of a sudden, this new disease arrives, and clearly there are major inequalities in terms of mortality and everything else across society. How do you measure the pandemic? How do you measure inequalities? How do you assess the equalities? I think the enormous need for good quality data and analysis that we do is brought to light there. Okay, anyway, getting back to your presentation. I'd like have two quick questions for you. You talk about the context in Latin America. To what extent do you believe that graduate research programs in demography in the region right now are adequate for the most part for preparing new generations of population experts to face the changing demands of the labor market? You touched on this a bit. And in your view, if you think that programs do need to change quite a bit, how precisely should they change? And what mechanisms, what ways should be used to assess and devise reforms for existing programs?
Yeah, that was, thank you, Tom. I think, and I'm talking again more on the side of those who are in charge of designing the programs, that we need to talk more. So we have two main working fields for our working options for our graduate students. Either they go to the academic sector, which in Mexico is a little bit sort of full now. So I have not only demography, but students in social sciences in general, finding problems to incorporate into the labor market because the academic and those the PhD graduates, no, because the academic sector is not opening new positions. And on the other side, you have some of them incorporating into the public sector. And I think that Sonaldo also mentioned that there's a great space for incorporating into the social sector or working with the civil society or with other organizations. So what I think is that we need to be more accepting. I'm not so sure about changes within the programs and within the curricula, but just trying to think to what extent the curricula is also corresponding to what is happening outside the labor market. No, there are some issues I didn't touch it here, but for example, at El Colegio right now we are discussing the jointed publication students and professors, which is something not very common in social sciences and humanities in Latin America, no? So how do you prepare our students which are going out into the labor market? They are full-time students, they cannot participate in research projects that take more than 20 hours a week. So there's all these discussion about the educational model that it's not only concentrated on the training in demography, but at a broader level, no? And I do think that it's also good to locate our discussion within that context.
Okay. Thank you very much. The next presentation will be made by Jordana Cristina de Jesus, and her presentation will focus on Brazil. The topic, again, will be university training in demography. What are the challenges in Brazil? So I'll leave the podium to Jordana.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I will share some slides with you. Okay. Can you see my slides? Yes?
Yes, that's good.
Okay, so let's go. Good morning, afternoon. I will check my timer. Good morning, afternoon, or even to all the colleagues. First, I would like to thank the union and Tom Legrand for this invitation. It's an honor to share this roundtable with all of you and give my insights in this important topic as a junior demographer. Silvia has already gave us a great picture of what happens here in Latin America about the education system. And Tom Legrand has already introduced me, but I would like to talk just a little bit more about me. As you may see, I'm a Black woman. Of course, what you can see is that I came from a very poor family, and I am the first woman of this family to go to college. I had the opportunity to get into Federal University of Minas Gerais, one of the most prestigious universities in Brazil. I also had the opportunity to get my master and PhD degree in demography from the same university at CEDEPLAR, a program we all recognize as a reference in Latin America. And I believe it's important to talk about my background because it has definitely shaped the ideas I would like to share with you today. Black and unprivileged people are often the subject of research in Brazil, but hardly the researcher or the speaker. So let's go to the discussion. So, sorry. And go back. Sorry. Okay, So what are the challenges faced by demography programs in Brazil today? Well, in this sense, the main challenge continues to be the one brought up by ALAP Conference today, the challenge of inequality. Because it's not possible to place the greatest good of any graduate training in Latin America far from contributing to a more inclusive society. Keep this in mind, our first step must be building a more inclusive academy, committing to transform ourselves and our immediate context in order to motivate changes in the society we are in. But how can we get long-term change for a more inclusive academy? And how the knowledge we are producing under more inclusive perspectives could reach a large public? And how can we extend the reach of university and scientific knowledge to all society? Let's think equity as the opposite of equality of treatment. In the last century, access to higher education in Brazil was restricted to upper socioeconomic groups. In the first picture, you can see how undergraduate students from public universities used to look alike in Brazil and homogeneous groups in terms of class and race. This century started with a massive expansion of public education in Brazil. The country threefolds the total number of higher education places in 16 years, from 3 million in 2001 to 10.8 million in 2017. And a policy pursuing an inclusive education system undertook expansion, of course, but also reform of its entry system for one that does not discriminate on unfair grounds. And so an affirmative measure took place in the form of a quota system for disadvantaged population in all Brazilian public universities, since the historical minorities at the university represented the majority of population in Brazil. The results of this racial focus policy in Brazil are remarkable. The access of the Black population to higher education increasing from 400,000 to 1.6 million between 2002 and 2015. And the second picture speaks for itself. Here we have some recently graduate students from the same university than in the first picture. So in some way, we Brazilians have made important changes. The combination of personal effort of young Brazilians, a large scope public policy, turn out into real opportunities for social mobility of Blacks and women. And I'm grateful to represent some of them here today. In fact, it is the framework of the policy of expansion what make possible to create the demography program where I am now, PPGD. In Brazil, we have 4 graduate programs in demography and population studies. 3, they are CDPLAR, PPGD, NEPO, and ENSE. 3 of them are located in the richest and more dynamic region of Brazil. PPGD is the only one outside this area located in the northeast, a region where almost half of its population live in poverty. PPGD is an emergent program. It has only 10 years since its foundation, and nowadays we are 13 professors and 31 students. So how can we reach a more diverse group of demographers in Brazil? I think that first we need to acknowledge this issue. We need to talk about it. That's why I'm bringing this issue here. We need to commit resources, scholarships, and grants. We need customized funding strategies to keep Black students, Black women, indigenous, people with disabilities in science, and in other unsupported group in our society. And we can learn from experience, since we already have some policies of affirmative actions in undergraduate courses in Brazil for some time. And we can use virtual meetings like we are doing now. Virtual meetings give us the opportunity to reach a large audience and promote inclusion, but this inclusion must reach emergent programs since they receive fewer resources. And the second challenge I would like to mention is the extending the scope of the university and the scientific knowledge. Silva also mentioned this. My point is, how do we turn scientific knowledge into a collective good in countries so unequal as Brazil. We know it's possible to exchange with society, keeping track of our methodological and theoretical rigor. We also know we need to break the false dilemma between popularization and vulgarization of scientific knowledge. And I think that extending the reach of science is a process of social return on investments in science. So in the big data area, we have an opportunity. I agree with Silvia that we can call this as an opportunity to train new researchers to be sensitive to the popularization of science. And the production and dissemination of scientific knowledge must be undertaken within the diversity found in the society in terms of class and race. Graduate programs still do not address disability as they should, as they could, and enlarging the relation with undergraduate programs and promoting this vision must be considered in our training agenda. Perhaps the COVID-19 pandemic could serve as a turning point for us. Let me share with you the experience from Honest COVID-19 from Pepe Gedem. When we started the Honest COVID-19, the idea was to gather into one platform all the social demographic analysis carried out in the observatory regarding the coronavirus pandemic. Our aim was simple: to contribute to the public debate throughout the dissemination of knowledge with scientific basis. Both professors and graduate students joined the observatory, and as a team, we have developed a large scope training project on the impact of COVID-19 in our region. And I'm glad to share with you some of the main results we obtained. For example, 75 original social demographic analysis published, and more than 100 citations in the media, almost 34,000 visits on the page, including 2,000 abroad. And we can see that several political decisions in the region were made based on our studies. I believe that with this experience, we have achieved the place that the university as an essential actor in providing reliable information. And we also highlighted the importance of demographic analysis in a context of a health crisis as we are living now. And concluding, right on the time, I advocate that we should commit our intellectual, economical, and human resources to community change and to contribute to an inclusive society. We need to combine strategies for supporting long-term change for more inclusive demography programs. I think we have to see ourselves as part of the society, part of the problem, but also part of the change. I think we need to look around and wonder, do we, as a collective, do we look like the society we came from? Do we, as demographer, as a collective, look like the society we came from? And do we represent its diversity? And I agree with some researchers that have statement that takes diversity to do science and find solution. This is my big message here. And I think that we cannot overcome regional, social, racial, and gender barriers if we're not able to change ourselves. We're not able to fight for it. And finally, I would like to leave this message. I believe that as demographers, we can contribute to extend the reach of the university and scientific knowledge in our society. Thank you. I look forward to comments and suggestions. Thank you, Tom. Right on time.
Perfect. Thank you for respecting the limit. Could you stop the sharing? Yeah, because so we can see
Sure.
better, please. I found your presentation to be fascinating. Real insights into the specific problems and needs to build a more inclusive university for demographic training in the context of Brazil. And these are issues that exist throughout the world. It's not just Brazilian, but you're presenting the issues that you know very well in Brazil. You presented some successes in opening up university admissions in the past with the pictures you saw at the very beginning. And you made the argument that there's a lot that is left to do, that there's a need to move forward. Could you tell us more about what precise actions the university training programs in Brazil that you know have taken or should be taking to better draw in students from disadvantaged population subgroups? I remember hearing elsewhere sometimes the problem is getting good enough students, being sure that the preparation is there. Do you have to reach out to ensure preparation? What precisely has worked and what needs to be done? And maybe just a little extra question that I thought that added on. You talked about Black groups. What about indigenous populations in Brazil? Is that also, I imagine that's just as big, if not a bigger issue for them. Anyway, okay. I gave you a lot to talk about.
Okay, thank you, Tom, for this question and the comments. I decided to talk about Black population because, as I have mentioned, I have some property to talk about it. But of course, we have to think about all those undersupported groups in our society, including indigenous population. And the policy of racial quotas in Brazil graduate programs are being developed in recent years. So this is a way to incorporate diversity in the programs. But it's important to note that this change, implementing policy of racial quotas and the graduate programs, is a demand that arises from organized student movements. So this is something that the students are trying to do. This is a change students are trying to do. And in 2015, racial quotas were adopted in the graduate programs of the Institute of Philosophy and Human Sciences from Unicamp, where NEPO takes place. I think they were the first to do this, and they have implemented affirmative actions since then. I also can share that CDPLAR is now considering the affirmative action policy as well. So some vacancies are reserved for self-reported Black or indigenous candidates, and also for people with disabilities. And I don't know if someone can add any information about ENS in the end of our talk, but in PPGDN, we are discussing this internally since we don't have any policy coming from the university. And I think we have to keep moving forward and keeping in mind that beyond reserving place, this is important, we need to reserve in place, but beyond reserving places, we have to promote conditions for the permanence of researchers from undersupported groups in graduate programs. Thus, it's necessary to assume responsibility. It's not just reserving places. And also for monitoring its development, always seeking to improve the process to certify the effectiveness of this action. But I think that as demographers, we are able to do this.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll probably come back to your talk in the general discussion, but it's time to turn to the last presentation today, which will be made by Frans Willekens on a very innovative new program, a relatively new program. It's been around for a few years now in Europe. He's going to be talking about the challenges for advanced demographic research training, lessons from the European Doctoral School of Demography. Take it away.
Okay, so you don't see my PowerPoint, do you? Okay.
No, we don't.
Okay, something went wrong then, so that's what I expected. Okay, then I will be talking anyway. So do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I sent you my PowerPoint presentations. Maybe you received them so you can look at them afterwards. So the European Doctoral School of Demography was established in 2005. And the reason why the school was established was to join forces. Because in many European countries, there was of course interest in demography, but the interest was limited. So limited to not permit sufficient funding for independent national programs. Then, so that's why several countries got together and initiated the school. It started 12 universities got together and the 4 major demographic research institutes in Europe. It started in 2005 under the auspices of the EAPS, the European Association of Population Studies. And that is also an important element because in order to have a European level school with sufficient support base, we needed to affiliate with a scientific organization, a professional organization, and that was the EAPS. So the school is under auspices, which means we have close ties with the school, but the school is of course independent of the EAPS. Then it is governed by statutes, so we have this very written down specific rules approved by everyone. And we have a scientific board where the partners are represented. And the scientific board basically coordinates the school. The local activities are run by the dean. And the school is hosted by a university for a period of 2 years, which means that the school is not always at one place. The school moves around Europe. And it has been in Germany, in Paris, in France, in Sweden, in Spain, in Poland, in Italy, Denmark, and currently it's again in Barcelona in Spain. So the school moves around and stays, it's hosted by an institute at a period of 2 years. Every 4 years, the school is evaluated by an external committee. And we are not involved in the selection of that committee. The school is not involved in the selection of that committee, but the EAPS Council is. But we may recommend some people. And the school, also an important element, the school is funded by its partners. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. I hope it's worked now. Yes. So the school is funded. Thank you very much for organizing this. The school is funded by its partners. So, and the funding means it's the cost of hosting the school, the cost of instructors. So those partners who send instructors to the school pay for them, okay? And the school, the instructor, the hosts pay for stipends, about 20 annual year. So since 2050, we have every year about 20 stipends paid by the partners. Now that means that the school is independent of external funding. And that was a very explicit choice to start out with. Namely, usually, that was our experience. When you get external funding, that's very nice. But many programs end when external fundings end. And we did not want to do that. So we wanted to have commitment. Commitment has been the key word in the school. All partners who participate in the school are committed to the school, and there are strong shared values and shared resources. And that does not mean that all partners contribute equally to the school. No, some partners have more money, like Max Planck Institute, and they contribute considerably more than other partners, let's say in East Europe, who do not have the luxury to fund their research and pay students to study abroad. Okay, it's not working now.
I'll try and
Okay, can you move to the next, because it doesn't seem to work. Okay, so the curriculum is, there are a set of preparatory courses because we recruit from very different disciplines and origin countries. So the students are not at the same level. So they need some preparation, and it's a 2-month program always in Rostock because they have the infrastructure. Then the core courses, 9 months, there are research seminars, and 1 day a week, a student works on his or her dissertation. Now, each course is coordinated by a coordinator, and instructions come from around Europe and around the world. Can you just move? Yes, thank you. So that are the list of preparatory courses, mathematics, statistics, and we always are. So the school in 2005 made the decision to concentrate on one computer language to focus. You can use Stata, you can use SPSS, of course, but to concentrate on one computer language, which is R. So which means students develop programming capabilities. And the core courses are data, mathematical, statistical, demographic theories, and models and simulation. Next, please. So now the students, the composition of the student population has changed over the period. Initially, it was more on Europe because the school responded to a need felt by several European countries to have a graduate training, but not having the means to organize that graduate training, that PhD level training. So therefore, they came together, they joined forces, and that was what the school was about. It's a 9-month program, so it's not a set of short courses, it's a 9-month program. But this year, also probably because of the fact the school is in Spain for the second time in Barcelona, we have several students from Latin America, North America, from Turkey, Israel, and several from Europe. But all these students are sponsored, and they are sponsored by institutes in Europe. And that are the institutes listed that are sponsored. Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research in Germany. CPOP is the Population Studies program at the University of Southern Denmark in Denmark, where currently Jim Vopel is. The London School of Tropical Hygiene and Medicine. This year, for the first time, they fund PhD students, and they fund 3. University of Southampton, Rome, La Sapienza, INET in Paris, NIDI in The Hague, and the Center for Demographic Research in Barcelona. So that means that NIDI and Max Planck fund several students from Latin America. That's how it works. But many students are already enrolled in the program. So if a student from, let's say, another continent enrolls in the European PhD program, that partner may send that student for additional training to the European Doctoral School. Next, please. Okay, now that's about the European Doctoral School. Let's now talk about the major challenges. And I see 3 major challenges in teaching demography. And they all refer to what has already been said. So some is new, most is not new. First, we need to reinvent demography. Bridge the divide between social and formal demography and action research. I fully agree with what has been said on action research. And so we have to reinvent demography. Second, more knowledge from data by smart databases that have particular intelligence capabilities. And we need to invest more in simulation. Next, please. Thank you. So, okay, diversity. Okay, as I mentioned several times, we have to emphasize diversity. Now, how do you emphasize diversity? By considering several subpopulations. That's the way demographers usually do it, socioeconomic status, SES. But to the extreme, you acknowledge diversity by having a field of population studies where the individual is the central unit of observation and the central unit of analysis, the individual. Now that has been, is old in demography, is also very old in biology mainly, where it has been called population thinking. And it's interesting that in some other fields than demography, population thinking is receiving a lot of attention, including in sociology and economics, but less so in demography. And for instance, if you look at Goldthorpe's book, he says sociology is a population science, which means sociology must acknowledge the diversity of people in society. Therefore, it has to focus more on individual and social groups rather than on populations and subpopulations. So, of course, if you look at individuals, all events are stochastic. So that means the demographic models that we use must be stochastic models, probability models. So the way we calculate the life table are out of date for already decades. So we should move to survival analysis, because everything that the traditional demographic life table can do, survival analysis can do. Next, please. The second is the life course. So the first was the emphasis on diversity. Second is individual life course. It's not sufficient to acknowledge individuals. You have to acknowledge individual in a dynamic setting. And the demographers are very experienced with cohort replacement. And cohort replacement theory drives demography, drives social change, since Norman Ryder had his famous paper, and drives the cohort component model that is used everywhere for population projections. But the life course has also become an important paradigm in demography, and it should become even more important paradigm in my view. So demographic behavior is embedded in the life course. Why do people migrate? Because they need a job, because they want education, they want to join a family. So migration, people migrate for a reason. The age patterns emerge from the life course dynamics. Cohort replacement drives social change, as Norman Ryder says. Individuals come and go, but populations stay. That does not mean that we have to renew most of what we do. No, not at all, because some of the instruments that demographers developed, like the Lexis diagram and the Lexis surface, can be used and are used today in several other disciplines, sometimes even more than in demography. Next, please. The second challenge is more smart databases. So we need to be more to inform ourselves better about how the data come about, how the data are generated, because data are not comparable, data are not harmonized. We need to model the data in order to be able to make the data comparable and to harmonize the data. Second is smart data science is more than pattern recognition and relationships between variables like regression. We should gradually phase out regression analysis. We should gradually phase out regression analysis. It has already been mentioned. Regression and relations do not tell you anything about causal link. It's statistical link, not a causal link. And that's one of the reasons why we need to phase it out gradually. Actors have become more important than factors, actors, networks of actors, and like support networks. And people can be members of several networks. A rate of membership method, a method developed in demography, not used much in demography. Influencers, and of course, diffusion mechanisms. Like Sean Kesselein's book on the diffusion processes underlying the fertility transition is extremely important and uses network theory. And then the data presentations in accessible format with uncertainty and of course, protection of privacy. Next, please. And then models. So we use quite a bit of models in demography, life table projections, other models, statistical models, but they all focus on factors, and we try to relate factors to one another. We need to relate actors to one another, networks. So life histories of actors, of individuals. And demography has that experience in kinship networks, support networks. So it's not all that it's kind of foreign to the field, no, it's building on the strength of demography. And we have to add behavioral rules, because the way the models work is they have transition probabilities and rates. But the behavior depends on objectives, depend on preferences, depend on goals in life. So that are behavioral theories, action theories, the theories of action developed by Max Weber, Coleman, Talcott Parsons in sociology and so on, and Gary Becker in economics and so on. These action theories have to be integrated in a theory of demographic behavior, and actor-based models or agent-based models, of course. So we need to predict the life histories of actors and networks, and that produces population projections. And some countries are working on that, like Statistics Canada is already very much working on micro-simulation to make their population projections. They do not have behavioral rules yet, but they are very strong in micro-simulation, which is a step to agent-based modeling. Next, please. Thank you very much. That was my presentation. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the discussions.
Okay, I'm trying to put this back so I can talk. Okay, thanks very much. I appreciated your presentation very much. I've spoken with several of your former students, and I know very well that they very much appreciate the training that they received. As you're talking, one very quick question came to mind. it's not really a doctoral program, it's a doctoral course program. After the people finished their training in this program, they go, I think, to their home university and write their thesis, which is the second stage of their doctoral program. Do the home universities, do they impose other courses that they need to take? Or do all of the universities recognize the European Doctoral School of Demography as sufficient for all of the courses necessary to do a doctorate? Would be one very short question. And then more generally, do you think that the European Doctoral School in Demography is replicable elsewhere? It requires, it seems to be, a high level of guaranteed funding and an enormous amount of coordination among universities. In my experience in Canada, the coordination among universities is probably the hardest of those two issues. And third, if you actually have time, because we're getting short on time, is how are more traditional demographic training programs in Europe holding up in the current context? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So yes, the universities recognize the program. That is, so we have this, Europe uses one system to count the quantity of a course. So they have the credit system, and we use the two, so the universities use it. And that's very important for two reasons. First, the courses that the students take in the European Doctoral School should be recognized by their universities, which means that they can spend time. Second, the professors who teach at the school, their time should be provided by the university, which means it's not extra to their regular activities, it's part of their regular activities. And that's not an easy process. This is a very difficult process. And but it worked. Then, is the school replicable because of its secure funding and so on? Well, we don't have secure funding, but we have a secure commitment. And the commitment is a key element, because funding is a consequence of being committed to a particular goal or a particular value or strategy. So, and partners are very successful in getting additional funding. For instance, if you want to host a school, that's a lot of money. That costs a lot to reorganize buildings and so on, even to provide laptops to students and so on. So, and the local organizer should then get additional funding, and of course, the school support it. But the school does not get the extra funding. The locals get the extra funding. And the third is, yes, is it applicable in a foreign context? Of course, the specifics will not be applicable, but a general idea, namely, that in order to, you have first to identify what you can share. Then you have to make sure that what you can share gets sufficient value, adds sufficient value to the regular activities, and then try to organize always based on sharing and commitment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Frans, for an excellent presentation. I'd like to take just a few minutes right now to let each of the panelists, if they want to ask questions of other panelists, to go ahead, and then we can open it up to the floor, and Susanna will be the key person in deciding who has questions to ask. So if you want to ask a question to others, please raise your hand, or just turn on your, there are only 4 of us, so just turn on your microphone and speak. Okay. No one has any questions, I guess. Okay, so I guess we should open it up to questions from the floor. If there are questions from the floor, Susanna, you should.
Yeah, I have been seeing here the chat. There are some comments about the quota on Brazilian universities and India. So maybe we should talk about a little bit about this topic, and I would ask someone who wants to step in and put their situation.
Okay, so you're asking somebody in the audience to ask
yeah,
a question?
somewhat, because like Sonaldo mentioned how it's in India. Laura Wong was talking about CEDEPLAR. at ANSI, IBG, Cesar Marx was talking. So Sylvia is asking for the word. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm really interested on the admission process and the quotas that Jordana mentioned and Laura mentioned in the chat. In the case of Mexico, because it's public universities, there's still in graduate, and when you look at the profile of our students in population studies, many of them are still first generation attending the university, but it's concentrated in urban areas, and we don't have any quotas regarding, for example, indigenous population. No? And I want to be very frank here, because part of the discussion has to do, well, no, we do these blind admission processes based on merits, and we defend a lot this idea of the meritocratic process in admission. So we don't do any quotas because there's no socioeconomic bias, to say it in a certain way. And that's the way we have been functioning. So I find it very interesting to know more about the experience in terms of the admission processes and the quotas, because something that I think I for that in Spanish it would say me hizo click, it makes me click from Jordana's presentation, is that also the research agenda and the topics of thesis and will be related to the profile of the social demographic profile of students, no? And in this case, adding the race issue. So I just wanted to mention that because I had the data on first generation students in our population programs. And so I think it's still working, as this is the last thing I want to say. I think that we are still playing this role in terms of social mobility, but I also have to say that looking broadly at our alumni, I'm also worried about the occupation, what happens afterwards. No, I mean, we have one of some of our best students finding it really, really hard to get incorporated into the labor force at the PhD alumni, and when they are looking for academic positions. I think that I stated my worry in my presentation.
Jordana, do you want to try and answer or respond to any of this?
Thank you, Tom. I think it's worth to mention that Joyce is talking here and chat about how it works in NEPO, and Laura also mentioned maybe they could talk about it. And Silvia, I just might finish words. We also have quota to enter as professor in the universities, not only at the programs, but now we have also quota for the positions as professors in the university. It's still low percentage, but we already have it, including thinking after they finish their PhD. But maybe Joyce or Laura could talk a little bit more about their experience.
Okay, can either of you turn on your microphone? I'm not sure.
Before they joining, I think they are kind of shy. I would say that the quota system ratios quota in Brazil has a lot of come and goings, and it started more social and now it's ratio, but it is on the undergraduate programs. Since demography is not in the undergraduate programs, we may still lag behind on that. And in the master's and PhD programs, there is a huge discussion. And Laura raised her hand is here, so she can talk about how it's difficult, this discussion about quotas in the master's and PhD programs, actually. Laura, please.
Yeah, thank you for letting me give some word. The first thing is that we don't have a federal initiative. So it depends on our universities. And luckily, all in here, we have this affirmative action. From the point of view of, from experience from CEDEPLAR, I should say that sometimes also this affirmative action touch our African students. And I think that has been a nice experience because results are showing that our investment has been fruitful. Several of our African students have now a very important role in their countries, and that means that we are making some return, useful return from our obligation to make a more inclusive demography.
I have a question. No one is raising hands, so I have a question. I'm really enjoy all the presentations, and I would like for us, Nico, yesterday, if you have one word to say about how we can go about North and South cooperation in improving demography. If it is one thing, what do you say we should do next, say, 4 or 5 years to improve that relationship between exchange students and professors? And Nico has his hand raised, so maybe he can ask Tom what you think, and then people will respond. Okay.
So for Nico.
Nico?
Okay, yeah, so I would like to thank you all for the presentations. It was a really very good roundtable. But I would like to follow up on the question that Tom asked to Frans and make it more specific. So if you look at this European model, and I'm from Europe, I'm involved in the European Association, so I'm biased. But if you look at that model, my question to the audience would be, and to the panel would be, could it be replicated in different format or whatever in the Latin American situation? Because if you listen to the presentations, there are some very good programs, but there are also, like we had in Europe, scarcity of funding and the need to pool resources to get this program to working for the benefit of all, but with the involvement and the commitment of all. I think could be a model that should be further thought about in the Latin American region, and perhaps also, like in Europe, the ALAP could be involved in that as a kind of the framework where those discussions could take place. Because I really think that the future, from an organizational perspective, is in pooling resources and so making our discipline a better discipline that serves the community better, as was also stated in several of the presentations. Would it work?
So now to ask the word. So
Sylvia.
Having just spent a semester teaching online, okay, I actually think we should start leveraging the online teaching possibilities, which can grow, short-term collaborative programs, okay, with an online component in a series of short-term courses. Okay, so some sort of a certificate program, a series of short-term courses, a lot of it online, and some sort of in-person. I think we can come up with some more creative ways of training than we have been doing in the past.
I think Sylvia wanted to speak.
Yeah, and I would just like to briefly say that I think that's something that we have not been doing that much, and probably I would say that I'm talking again about Mexico, is to trying to foster more mobility of our students within the programs, no? And for example, having more Brazilian students go to Mexico to spend the semester here, or our students go to the Brazilian PhD programs in Argentina or in Uruguay. The other thing has to do, again, that we have to focus that in Latin America, most of the training in demography is happening at the master's level, no? And we have had some experiences in mobility within and not coordination of programs, just mobility of students. No? So recognizing that a student that spends a semester in another institution, the credits are going to be taken in the programs in another institution. And so, for example, in Mexico, because we have funding from the National Council, we have circulation of master students in some of our programs. So the problem is that even if you don't have it within the country, No, I was looking at my list. In the case of Mexico, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 master's programs and 2 PhD programs. No, and so we are not doing it within the country, which would be easier before even moving to the region. But I think that's a goal that we can look for in the future.
Yes, France, you have to turn on your microphone. And we have about 3 minutes left.
Okay, good. So maybe I can say how it started in Europe. It was at a situation where there was a lack of funding. And it was very difficult to get partners to cooperate because they have different objectives and so on. There are two initial elements. The first was a set of short courses were organized, and there was European money given to Max Planck to organize short courses that would recruit students from all over Europe. That was one step. And that was a kind of a second step was that the European Association of Population Studies organized a committee on education. And that committee has to come up with what has to be done to improve demography training in Europe. And that's something that ALAP can do. ALAP could establish a committee on education with the question, what needs to be done in Latin America to improve the education in demography? And okay, that initiates a discussion, and that could generate several good ideas. Thank you.
I think we have to close.
Okay, so I just want to thank everybody again. I think this has been an extremely rich conversation. I hope it's the start of additional webinars of this sort, and hopefully maybe not a webinar, maybe in 2 years in Valparaiso, if ALAP decides to go back there, I would love to visit there. Thank you very much, and I'll sign off.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Gracias. Very rich discussion. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Adiós,
Thank you.
Susana. Adiós a todos.
Adiós,
Se les
Silvia.
extraña.
Adiós. Bye,
Se extraña
Sonalde. Bye.
verlos.